can go anywhere.
TARDIS?
Well, I made up the name TARDIS from the initials. Time,
relative dimension in
space.
That's okay. Culture shock. Happens to the best of us.
Time and relative dimension in space. TARDIS for short.
If you're anything like me, when you discovered Doctor Who, it would have been with the new 2005 version of the series. Christopher Eccleston, Billy Piper, Russell T Davies, all new and action-packed.
Run!
But discovering the show's 50-year history, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the show of 1963 is completely different to the one we tune into now. What makes Doctor Who so unique isn't just what it decides to change, but what it decides to keep and evolve, making it the only show on television to have one single, decades-long continuity. Now, I know going back to watch a 50-year-old black and white show might be a daunting idea, but don't worry. This video is your guide to the very first season of Doctor Who, showing what's different and what has stayed relatively the same all these years. If you're a fan of NuWho, you will love what Classic Who has to offer. So let's start at the beginning, 1963, where I'm sure you know, a familiar police box sits waiting. What's most interesting to me about the very first episode of Doctor Who is not just the firsts of the show's history. As interesting as the first trip in the TARDIS is, no, what I like is something that is still in the show today, and that's focusing on the companions rather than the Doctor. Producers Verity Lambert and Sidney Newman were very aware of which kind of characters were needed.
So, good-looking guy, good-looking gal, a kid who gets herself into all kinds of trouble, plus an older man, quirky. I'll come back to him.
Susan fills the role of the children watching the show, someone who lacks an experience and is there to learn from the other characters. Ian and Barbara are the average viewer, asking questions and having their mind blown as they travel the universe. The Doctor is the educator, the wise old scientist. When the decision was made to make Susan the Doctor's granddaughter, it only made sense that the human characters became the surrogate for the audience. A natural but important extension of this is presenting the story through the eyes of the companions. It's a decision that makes Doctor Who that much more unique, and that the Doctor is never really the main character of his own show. It's his companions. Episode 1 of An Unearthly Child introduces the Doctor near the end of the episode, after we follow Ian and Barbara investigating the oddness of one of their pupils. This approach allows a sense of normality to develop around Ian and Barbara, as we wonder the same things they do. Episode 1 of the new series, Rose, does a similar thing. We really get a sense of who Rose is and what she thinks of life, before the Doctor comes in, drawing her and the viewer into the idea of travelling through time and space. I think this way of introducing Rose is part of the reason why we look back on her so fondly. In Series 10, a similar reboot has happened. Pearl Mackie's introduction, sharing much of its DNA with An Unearthly Child and Rose. Bill's view on life and who the Doctor is allows us to reshape an entire view of the show, despite the fact that not much else has changed between the previous series and now. The show itself has gone back and forth on this idea of companions at its centre, which might leave the companions feeling fairly underdeveloped as we meet them through the eyes of the Doctor instead of their own. To me, the show is at its best when it uses the companions to tell the story. An Unearthly Child is important for so many reasons, but it is essential viewing in understanding why NuWho is built the way it is.
Still a police box. Why hasn't it changed? Dear, dear. How very disturbing.
One of the most iconic villains in sci-fi history make their debut in this story, the Daleks, along with the planet Skaro, the Dalek homeworld. The plot is fairly simple. The Doctor and co must help the Thals, the pacifist race on Skaro, defeat the Daleks. Straightforward enough. However, this story brings up the first obstacle in tackling Classic Who, and that's pacing. See, all Classic Who stories are told in serial form, usually a group of 4 or so episodes. Each episode ends on a cliffhanger leading into next week's episode. Particularly in the first Doctor's run, there were many serials that ran for quite a bit longer, the longest being the Daleks' Master Plan at 12 episodes. With this serial lasting for 7, it can often feel like not a lot has happened per episode. Episode 6, for example, The Ordeal, partly follows Ian and a group of Thals crossing a trench, but it's dragged out over the whole episode and it starts to feel tedious. This wasn't a problem exclusive to Doctor Who. other shows shot in this period suffered the same problems. Unlike today, where the show is shot single camera and can have as many cuts as needed, technology meant that only a few cuts could be made per episode, usually saved for changing between scenes. The fact that every episode had to basically be performed live meant pacing was a constant issue. A side effect was that fluffs of lines commonly made it to the finished episode.
I do hope your effects outside the ship hasn't affected you too much.
If you can bear the slowness, there's a lot to be taken from this serial. The Doctor's early interaction with Ian and Barbara is quite harsh, at one point suggesting that he and Susan leave Ian to find a kidnapped Barbara on his own.
Suggest we leave at once.
We're not leaving until we've found Barbara.
Very well. You may stay and search for her if you wish, but Susan and I are going back to the ship. Now come along.
He is reluctant to take help and is very much a grumpy old man at this stage. You can see Capaldi took a lot from this stage of the First Doctor for his portrayal of the 12th Doctor. And with both Doctors, it's the experiences with his companions that slowly softens his personality until he genuinely cares about them. As cool as it is to watch the first Dalek story, it's the Doctor that makes this serial worth it for me. Over the course of the story, you watch how the Doctor begins to see the use of his companions, and coming up with plans together to get out of trouble really makes it feel like they are beginning to bond. Somewhat of a dark horse in all of Who, this 2-episode story takes place entirely within the TARDIS, and it's the only story in all of Doctor Who history to do so. I find this episode one of the darkest of the First Doctor's run. The basic plot is that something is wrong with the TARDIS, and it's causing some unexplainable behaviour among its inhabitants. I'm reminded of the episode Midnight in Series 4, one of my favourite episodes, that also deals with mistrust and suspicion amongst a trapped group of people. I get the same eerie vibe here as I do with Midnight, and the short 2-episode length alleviates some of the earlier pacing problems. There's something quite scary about watching our main characters, who we've only just begun to know, do a complete personality turn as a result of the problem. For Ian and Barbara, it's an even more dangerous situation, as they still have no idea what these two aliens have the potential to do to them if turned against them. I feel this serial is the one that gave me the confidence to keep watching. After a brilliant start with An Unearthly Child episode 1, it dips from episode 2 right through the Daleks, with only moments jumping out that make watching them worthwhile. But this brought it right back, and I began to really enjoy just watching this team together. If you've enjoyed it this far, then the rest will come a bit easier. Which is just as well, as this is as far as you can watch before you get into the saddest thing in all of Doctor Who, and that's missing episodes.
Can it be possible then that this is the end?
The first of the purely historical stories, this one finds the TARDIS crew meeting Marco Polo and taking part in his caravan across Asia. It's a serial that was designed to cover the other half of the educational aspect of the show. While the Daleks briefly covered some scientific concepts, this was to briefly tell the story of Marco Polo through the eyes of travellers from modern times, a history teacher's dream. What I enjoy about this episode is simply that it fills the exact mandate of Doctor Who. Travellers who find themselves involved with, and taking part in, events throughout time and space. The story frames what are real life events around the time travellers' presence, and the idea that their influence helped create the history they travelled to see in the first place is such a brilliant idea. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with this serial is the fact that no footage of it exists. The only way to watch now is through the loose cannon reconstructions, and while not perfect, they do their best to provide the visuals that the audio recordings so desperately need. But it can be a difficult thing to make sense of if you aren't used to it. Some say you could probably skip this story and not miss much, but I would say that it's worth giving it a try if only to understand the original intention of why the Doctor not only travels in space, but time as well. That, and later on you will be facing partially complete stories, where one or more of the episodes will be missing. The Keys of Marinus has a lot going for it in terms of story, partly because it's so simple. The crew get trapped on a planet and are told they must retrieve the Keys of Marinus to escape. And that's basically it. It's the first serial to have a completely new setting every week, jumping from a pyramid to an imaginary city, a jungle, a snowy landscape, and, weirdly, a courtroom. This to me is when the show decided it could be fun and over the top as well as serious. The overarching cliche of having to find pieces of something scattered all over to combine into one really gelled with the premise of Doctor Who's Adventure of the Week. and it's a nice change of pace for the travelling to be motivated by an overarching purpose. It's an idea that you could say applies to NuWho, although to a lesser extent. The new series uses arcs such as Bad Wolf in Series 1, Torchwood in Series 2, and Saxon in Series 3 to give the series an overall purpose and momentum rather than just individual stories. The Keys of Marinus feels the most familiar to NuWho natives in that respect. I enjoy this story for the variety it provides, and it's great to watch the now familiar TARDIS crew getting on so well. The episode also has vague themes of free will and the danger of intelligent machines, something that Doctor Who would visit again many times over the years. Interestingly, the aliens of this episode, the Voord, were designed to catch on with children in the same way the Daleks did a few months previously. Yeah, I wonder why that didn't work out. Probably the most interesting story in all of Season 1, another historical, but this time introducing key sci-fi elements. This is the first story in Doctor Who to deal with the concept of time paradoxes. Travelling back to the time of the Aztecs, Barbara finds herself worshipped by them as she bears resemblance to their god. Barbara wonders if she can use her newfound power to stop the sacrifices performed by the Aztecs, but the Doctor insists such a change could mess with the course of history.
If I could start the destruction of everything that's evil here, then everything that is good would survive when Cortez lands.
But you can't rewrite history. Not one line.
It's probably clear already why I love this episode. The moral contrast between what Barbara and the Doctor think is right asks the question of why the Doctor really needs his companions in the first place. The dangers of changing history, I think, is explored quite early on in the show's run, planting seeds for ideas such as fixed points in time, which have become huge staples in the new series. The moral greyness of the Doctor is again a point of conflict between him and his companions, with the Doctor finding no problem in letting someone go to their death if it means keeping history safe. The greater good versus the needs of the few is quite a deep concept for a daytime show to tackle, but if it didn't, Doctor Who might not have grown to be what we recognise today. The Doctor's reluctance to change significant points in history, and his inevitable involvement anyway, developed into what became one of the most important character points for the Doctor, even going as far as becoming part of the reason why he left his home planet. Despite the fact that by the end of this episode, nothing much has really changed, the characters all learn that it's the smaller victories that make time travel worthwhile. I have one simple thing to say about this serial, and that's the Sensorites are the cousins of the Ood. So if you like the Ood, and the episode Planet of the Ood, then you'll probably enjoy this one. That being said, there are some great moments in this episode. Susan describes what we now know as Gallifrey for the very first time, echoed by the 10th Doctor.
But at night the sky is a burnt orange, and the leaves on the trees are bright silver.
And we get a glimpse of a Doctor you would be sorry you ever crossed.
I don't make threats, but I do keep promises. And I promise you, I shall cause you more trouble than you bargained for, if you don't return my property.
The story is okay, involving another two species in a conflict that the TARDIS crew must help solve. What is interesting though, is thinking of what this episode potentially means for the Ood. With the Sensorites' conflict being with humans, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to think that in the time after this story, humans returned to this part of space, ready to enslave the races they knew lived there. But then, that's just speculation on my part. I'd say this one is worth a watch, if only for the hindsight new stories have given us.
I've been to this solar system before, years ago. Ages. Close to the planet's sense sphere.
And for the life of me, I still can't figure out if that's hair on the Sensorite masks. Finally, the end of the season is marked with the Reign of Terror. Becoming involved with a chain gang of revolutionaries, the crew get themselves wrapped up in plans to rescue prisoners from the guillotine, risking their own heads in the process. This is a great story if you like watching your team interact with historical figures, even more so than Marco Polo for me, as I was familiar with the people involved with the French Revolution. Figures such as Robespierre and Napoleon make appearances, and with this being the First Doctor's favourite period of history, he wastes no time getting into the mood. I think the problem from this story comes in recognising what the Aztecs taught us about fixed points in time. If history can't be changed, then what good can our heroes really do beyond watching the inevitable happen? I think this goes a long way in the show later having a shift in its purely historical stories. instead adding more fantastical twists and taking creative liberties in order to tell a more compelling story. Using the term season finale like we do today wouldn't be accurate. The next season, in fact, began the week after this one ended, but it marks the end of the first ever production block of Doctor Who, and laid out all of the blueprints for what the show really could be. And we've only scratched the surface. Over the course of the next couple of seasons, we meet new, increasingly elaborate monsters and robots, make our way back to London in a few interesting circumstances, say goodbye and hello to companions a few times over, and we haven't even begun to mention the mechanism of the Doctor's own longevity. So I wish you luck with your own journey with the First Doctor, to see for yourself the beginnings of a show that has reached so many people around the world, and is close to the hearts of many fans just like me and you. Just remember that no matter what changes, there's great care into keeping the essence of the original show, even going as far back as the very first episode. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Doctor Who? What's he talking about?